I sound very busy. I guess I have been. I don't know. My name is Gary Greiner. First of all, thank you for coming out tonight. I see Janice back there. I didn't see her earlier. Janice and I have been friends a very long time. Born and raised here in Terre Haute. My father still lives here at 84 years old. Terre Haute is very important to me. It is my community. For a few years, many years, or several years ago, I worked for a large funeral corporation and traveled and could have lived anywhere during that time, but I always came back to Terre Haute because this is my home. Tonight we're going to talk about a few things. And first of all, I want to thank you for braving the weather. I think it's supposed to hit about 7:45 or so. So I'm just going to talk as long as you want me, and then when you're done with me, say, "See you, Gary," and I'll head for the door. So that's okay. I will not be offended. But we're going to talk about a few things tonight, and just some kind of silly stuff before we get into Terre Haute funeral homes and local history. And we're going to talk about where funerals started and why they're here, and kind of some interesting little facts. I think they're interesting. And I have some prizes for those of you who can answer some of the questions. So, okay. The word funeralis. Does anybody know what the word funeralis stands for? Torchlight parade. It's a Greek word. So when you think about it, it still stands true today. When we go to the cemetery, we all have our lights on in our cars. We go there. Where that really comes from, ancient times, even caveman days, they believed in evil spirits, so they buried their bodies at night. They felt they were protected, and they went to the grave with torches. So, believe it or not, that is carried through today. It's not so much for safety as it is for it's been going on for hundreds and thousands of years, I guess. So, nothing interesting out of that. No, okay, nobody gets a prize for that one. We're going to talk about the origination of embalming, why we embalm bodies. We have a gentleman here who has quite an embalming past right over there in the blue shirt, so he's my neighbor, part-time neighbor. So, anyway, so embalming really has been going on since ancient Egyptian times, and even before that. Interesting, the richer you are, the more important you were, the more embalming you got done to your body. If you were a poor guy, like me and most of my friends, you were wrapped in tar and put on the roof of a building and dried in the sun. So those are for the poor folk. Now, the richer you were, the more you had removed from your body. So if you were really, really rich, they would take out your brain and your heart and your liver and your kidneys and you name it, and they would be in different jars. Because you know when they... I know, don't worry, it'll get better in a minute. So when you enter the old pyramids of days gone by, and you see, oh, well, here's King Tut or whoever it is, there were jars. Well, that's what's in those jars. So just so you know. Now, embalming has had different phases through the years, and don't worry, I won't get real graphic with it. But as far as when it became popular, we're going to skip ahead a very long time. When it became popular in the United States. Did anybody know when it became popular in the U.S.? Civil War, bingo. Abraham Lincoln was a big fan of embalming and had made friends with a gentleman who had pretty much perfected that. And there were so many people killed in the troops in the Civil War that Abraham Lincoln, whatever your politics are, I think he had a kind soul. So it was important to him to ship the young men back to their homes, and the best way to do it was to embalm them, put them on trains, and send them back. So embalming became popular, and so in the mid-1860s. So with that said, it has grown and grown and grown and grown. I met with a family today. I thought of this because they were kind of friends of mine, but they were in for pre-arrangements, and they were talking about, well, why do we have to do all this, and why, and I said, well, you folks have created all of this, you folks have developed pretty cemeteries and pretty caskets and pretty vaults and embalming, all those things. I didn't do it. I'm just here as that's what I do for a living, but I didn't create all those policies. So that's how it all got started with embalming. Any questions about that? I know you want to know all about embalming. Great detail, don't you? No. Okay. No prize for you yet. Okay. All right. It was interesting because of this presentation. I always say I know what I know, but I didn't know a few things. Or I know there's a lot of things I don't know, but some things I didn't know that I felt would be important tonight as far as funeral homes in Vigo County. So I have a little in at the Historical Society, so I went down there and pilfered through some records. And the first funeral home and record in Terre Haute was 1858. And there have been, I counted today, about 155 funeral homes of different names since 1858. And if you ever need them, a list of them, I've got them right here. So Yeah, and I'll be glad to share this with you. Anyway, it was interesting for me to go through there, and for you folks, of course, your hobby is here tonight. It was very interesting for me to go through there and see what funeral homes dating back to 1858 that you can actually trace to some existing here today. And that's true. There's only one that I can really bring to today. And we've all heard of Isaac Ball, have you not? Well, I've known of Isaac Ball all of my life, Ball Funeral Home. And I'm not so young, but I truly don't remember when it was on 3rd Street. Does anybody remember when it was on 3rd Street in here? It was about 3rd and Poplar area. 30 North 3rd was the address. And there again, I was going to say this earlier. I'm telling you information as I gathered it and as I know it. If someone knows I'm wrong, say, Gary, that isn't right. And I won't argue with you because I'm just telling you as I know it. But Isaac Ball, we're going to talk about him in a minute. But he was not only well known in the Terre Haute community for Ball Funeral Home, which grew into Ball Porter, which now is Callahan and Hughes. So on 605 South 25th Street. So that's the only one I can trace from about 1860 forward. Now we're going to talk about Isaac Ball in a minute, then we'll talk about funeral homes. I didn't know much about Isaac Ball, and I did a little research on him. And there again, some of you may know more about him. I heard of Ball Funeral Home all my life, and when I became a funeral director many years ago, there's an Isaac Ball Fellows Award for the Indiana Funeral Directors Association. And I thought to myself, well, that can't be the same Isaac Ball from Terre Haute. Why would they, but it is. Isaac Ball was very well known in the entire United States. He was born in 1829 in New Jersey. I could bore you with all the details, but family moved to Ohio, family moved to Indiana, etc. When he was young, he got an apprenticeship making, what did funeral homes and funeral directors do before they really did? What business were they in aside from being a funeral home? You win a prize, sir. So. You get a lovely Greiner for your own keychain. So. You're welcome. And there are more of those handy gifts ahead, so be on your toes, folks, for the next questions. I should be shot, I know, but anyway. So it was interesting. So he became a cabinet maker and a wood craftsman or whatever. Ended up in parts of southern Indiana, and this was I found interesting, ended up in Lafayette, Indiana. He was about 18 years old. Didn't like Lafayette, so he got on a steamboat and came from Lafayette to Terre Haute. How cool is that? I thought that was the coolest thing I read all the last few days. But he did that. When he landed here, there again, he got a job as part-time at a funeral home called Stevers, which was around, who I don't know anything about really. It's all just a mention of that. But he continued to build furniture, and do you know why the furniture in the funeral home coincide? Caskets. You get a keychain. Okay. Or would you rather have an ink pen choice? Ink pen, okay. They built their own. Actually, we're going to have a quiz now. What's the difference between a casket and a coffin? Before anybody answers it, a coffin is shaped like this. Kind of like Dracula. Wide at the shoulders, narrow at the feet. A casket is rectangular. Okay? So that's the difference. I gave my story away. That's the difference. Okay. Any question? A coffin, like Dracula, you think of, is shaped like this. And a casket is rectangular like that table. So, gosh, I gave away my free prize, that one. So, anyway, but that's the difference. And it drives me crazy when people go, yeah, we want to look at your coffins. We don't have coffins, we have caskets. But anyway. So anyway, Isaac Ball landed in Terre Haute through a series of events, got a job in funeral service and furniture making and all those things. When this is where it got interesting to me, he somehow had a connection, and this, of course, keep in mind how long ago this was. Civil War was going on. It was mid-1860s. He was 35 years old or so, which in today's terms was 55, 60 years old, probably. I don't know, really. So, oh, hi, I didn't see you back there. I know a lot of these people. Anyway, so he got a contract with the Confederates, and there was a prison here for Confederates of about, according to my records, you may argue with me, about 1st and Hallman in that area, 1st and Poplar Street in those areas. Does that sound right? Oh, cool.
It was a meat packing plant that was no longer
That's correct.
And they turned it into
And what I hear, they've actually found foundation of that in the ground there. So anyway, he had a contract to, when they would die out of there, he would embalm them and ship them to their families. And what's interesting to me too, and I don't remember this funeral home, but I called my dad and he said, "Oh yeah, I remember that." In front of the old Ball funeral home, there was a sign, and it was shaped like a man. It was, just like if someone dies on CSI, how they tape it out, it was a metallic sign. This is an interesting Terre Haute story, to me anyway. Shaped like a man, and it was, I'm only about 5'10", but it was about my height and, my size, and it was a sign that said Ball Funeral Home on it. What that was, they made metallic containers and shipped those bodies back to the family, and they were metal, and the lids screwed on them, and that was an actual lid off of one of them that had been used by a Confederate soldier was shipped up here in it, and he was later buried at Highland Lawn in Soldier Circle, and they took that sign, and Isaac Ball was like, "Oh heck, let's use it for a sign." So he took a top of that old, I don't know whether they call it a casket or a coffin, we'll call it a receptacle, and he put Isaac Ball Funeral Home, and that sign hung there for 40 years, I think. And I have no idea what happened to it, but that would be a great find for Vigo County history. So, anyway, Isaac Ball had that contract. He, at one time, owned a casket company, a vault company, an embalming fluid company, and shipped all those products all over the United States, which, think about it, in the 1860s, that was a big deal. Shipping, trains, all those things. So anyway, probably the most interesting thing I found out about during my little process was about Isaac Ball and how interesting of a guy he was. Married, had 4 children, I believe, and one of them went into the funeral business. Later, he sold out to a man named Francis Porter, Ball Porter. Francis Porter owned it. It was on South 25th Street where David Callahan is now. They sold it to Dick Hughes. Dick Hughes sold it to David Callahan, and here we are today, 2014. So that's the only one I can trace back. Questions so far? Yes, Reese? What is embalming fluid? No, not weird. That's what makes this interesting. Questions. I know this lady here wants to know that in great detail. So. Might as well be. I should be embalmed if that's the case. So. Exactly. Embalming fluid does have formaldehyde in it, but many years ago, especially when they were embalming those bodies and sending them back, they had arsenic in it, and arsenic is a great preservative, and so, but also very, very dangerous, as we know. So now it's formaldehyde, humectants to keep your body nice and fluid and nice and moist and so it doesn't dry out. Humectants and just water-based and dyes. That's pretty much all it is. Embalming fluid. Okay, that was interesting, Ruth. Any other questions like that? Okay. Any questions about embalming other than the rich folks? Yes.
That's what I was going to ask you. What do they have in the war period, like in the front where there was, and where they died, to what they used to get them shipped back home?
Railways. And they had portable makeshift embalming stations that were tents, and they would, seriously, I've seen pictures of them, they had tables just out in the sunshine, whatever, and Corporal John died, and they just embalmed him right there, and shooting going on around him, and they'd put him in a wooden coffin or some kind of those metallic boxes and send him home on a train. Yeah, to answer your question, yes, it was an arsenic-based fluid. Yes, and like I said, it worked very well. Yes.
One of my answers, guys, the typhoid fever was along those and they buried him in a mass grave down there.
Right, and they would do that as well. I think obviously that would have been, and I don't know if that would happen today in a situation like that, and they had typhoid or something that's going around now, I don't know if they wouldn't do that again, honestly. But they certainly did that. But I think that's where. Do I?
To contain the typhoid?
Yes, and they would usually burn them before they buried them. They put all the bodies in there, catch them on fire, then cover them up. Yeah, graphic as it is, but that's the way it is. So, yeah. But back to the embalming, that's what they did, to ship them back. They did have mass burials back then. Yeah. But there again, President Lincoln at the time said we want to help our families back north and wherever they were. So that's how it all happened. Other questions? This is great. Yes, ma'am.
Speaking of mass burials, when there was an epidemic here
roughly what year, or what period of time?
1890 to, without looking, I don't know, 1890 is what I'm thinking.
No record of that person being buried, is what you're saying. And you've researched all the possibilities.
Right.
Yeah.
It's death certificate, there's nothing on the backside as far as the area.
Does it say who handled the service or anything? Really? Well, I'm sure. Did you have a question? There were. I mean, I don't know. That's an interesting question. I found. Do you ever hear of Orchard Hill Cemetery? Where is that? Tell me. Oh, is that right? So I didn't know that. I learned that in my reading. So I didn't know that. I learned that. Okay. Okay. Yes, Janice. Indian Orchard. Okay. All right. See, I didn't know that. I need to come to these meetings more often. So, yes, ma'am.
Do you have a service at your place where if someone wants to go back in and look in your old record books, we have those.
They borrowed them. but yes. You have to ask her for my records, but yes, yeah.
Yeah, 1937,
Yeah, something like that. It's interesting. My funeral home, Greiner Funeral Home's only been in business about 6 years. But the location I'm at was the Cross Funeral Home. Well, the Cross is, I'll just tell you, the Cross did it. Cross Funeral Home started in about 1927 in Lafayette, 1202 North Lafayette. Moved to my building at 2005 North 13th in 1939. I have records. They were up, in 2 or 3 months ago now, and they said, do you have records? And I have these big record books like this, and they date back from, what are those that you have?
seems like it's 1937.
Right. All right. Right. And those are all Cross Funeral Home records. So absolutely, they're going to be here or wherever they're going to be, but you're available, right? But also come to the funeral home. Now, most funeral homes that I've been involved with do have records. There are a lot of funeral homes that have gone out of business or closed through the years, and some of those I can tell you pretty much where those records are. I think the library has a lot of them. Janice is smiling. Go ahead.
Private wall. That Callahan had their record?
Callahan and Hughes would, I believe.
We have people coming in and we
If he just call David and ask him, if anybody's got him, he's got them, because that's where that funeral home ended up. So yeah, that would be a gold mine if you found those.
Well, the only thing we have like a receipt book that's in the wall. Certified. That's all we have.
Yeah, my best bet is that he does have them or knows where they are, or has given them to someone. So, sure. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you talked a little bit about involvement and stuff. Do you know, like, that the 1800s and early 1900s, how prevalent cremation would have been?
Ask about cremation. Cremation, especially in the Midwest where we are, would have been unheard of. But yeah, there just wasn't a lot of cremation. Cremation rate today is about 40 to 45%. Probably 40% of my business is cremation. When I started this business 30 years ago or so, it was about 4%. Cremation was popular. If you go back 1,000 years, it was popular. Big, just mounds of fire, and they waited till people died and they burnt them. So that's the original cremation, if you want to call it that. But back then it was unheard of. I don't know of a crematory. I do know in the 40s and 50s, which is not what you're asking, they were always sent to Indianapolis. There was Central Crematorium is what it was called, and it was downtown. So smaller cities like Terre Haute, even though Terre Haute was much bigger then, they shipped all the bodies over there for cremation. So, but now Terre Haute, I think we have 4 crematories. So, yeah. a lot of reasons that people choose cremation. The cost can be a factor. What we find, the higher educated people they are, like PhDs and things, they want to be cremated. The hardworking middle-class people like my family, we want full funerals. So the cremation can be based on cost, it can be based on religion, it can be on practicality, all those things. Yes, Ruth?
Anything to do with the space available?
Well, here again, being in the Midwest and the, what do they call us out west, the flyover states, one of us, but I kind of take that personally. But anyway, we are rich in land here. So in any of our lifetimes in this room, and lifetimes ahead, a few, I don't believe it'll be a big concern. Roselawn is a big cemetery. They have ample space for many, many, many years. Highland Lawn, contrary to popular belief, has space available, and so does Woodlawn on North 3rd Street. Everybody says, oh, it's full. It's not full. There are graves available in Woodlawn Cemetery. So if you go to the coastal states, you go to California, you go to New Jersey, Louisiana, for instance, cremation is very popular. If you want to buy a grave, let's say you go to Roselawn tomorrow and buy a grave. I don't work for Roselawn, but the grave's going to be about $1,500, $2,000 for a grave. If you go to Highland, $600, $700, $800. If you go to California, it's $8,000 or $10,000 for a grave. So they're encouraging people to be cremated, and so a lot of it's based on where you are as far as the popularity of cremation. So save your money if you're going to move to Los Angeles area and be buried. Yes, ma'am. And that goes back to I don't know. I mean, that's something that I'm suddenly interested in. Mary Lee would maybe know that. I'll ask her. That's a good question. Speaking of Woodlawn Cemetery, does anybody know about St. Joseph Cemetery and the history of it?
Well, I'm sorry.
Well, thank you. There was a keychain on the table here, and nobody got the keychain. Yes, and there's also a Jewish section in Woodlawn Cemetery. But do you know where St. Joseph Cemetery started at? It's where St. Ben Catholic Church is. That was St. Joseph Cemetery. 9th and Ohio. Yeah, that cemetery, there was a small Catholic cemetery there, and the German Catholics were very, very prevalent in the Terre Haute area. Yes, sir.
Gary, you are aware that cemetery has to go?
Yes.
They are managed murder and water damage.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody has, I have photographed that entire collection that they have.
Can everybody hear what he's saying? That St. Joseph's Records, Calvary, Dennis out of Calvary has those. Interesting you brought that up. Just recently, we had a burial at St. Joseph. And in my 30 years in business or so, I've maybe had one or two. So what was interesting, that I had to go out there and look through those records, and they were burnt. Or are burnt. So we found, because they said, I'm going to make this up, but Grandma gave a grave to Aunt Edith or something. So we had enough names to trail back and found that was true. So the family was allowed to bury there. But you're exactly right. But to go back where it was, it's kind of interesting that they wanted that property built St. Ben's on, and there were some bodies buried there, and they said, well, we're going to move those. So they moved, and I don't know how many there were. I think 25, I've been told. There again, disclaimer here. 25 I've been told, but they moved those bodies actually to the northwest corner of Woodlawn up there, St. Joseph. And there was a Jewish section up there as well. So.
What about the city cemetery?
What do you?
The Outlawn Cemetery in the city of Terre Haute. Have you ever parked there?
No.
I bet you have.
Where is it? I don't know if I have.
Terre Haute First Parking.
Which, downtown?
Downtown. Yeah.
I didn't know that. I bank there, so I'll be more respectful when I get on my car next time. I really didn't know that. So what happened to those graves?
Supposedly moved to.
Supposedly. Supposedly moved. Well, that's scary.
I have a feeling if they did some digging, they would probably find some interesting things.
So I didn't know that either. Yes, Janice.
There is a cemetery
Down in Wabash?
I have an article.
I didn't know that. See, I need to come to more of these meetings. Does anybody know Dan? Yes, sir.
Gary, the cemetery was at 7th and Ohio. That was the city cemetery in Putnam. And this is the stuff that I got from Final Lawn. That was the city cemetery, and they realized real fast that it wasn't going to have enough room. And so they went out in the hinterlands and built a new cemetery, city cemetery. It came called Woodlawn. It was on the Clinton Road, basically, at that time.
I didn't know that. That's very interesting.
Both Mallory and Highland Lawn have prepared documents telling the history of the cemetery. I found it very good.
Well, I'm out there enough. I probably should read up on that a little bit. So that's interesting. I didn't know that at all. So anybody know Danny Wolf, owns Wolf's Auto Auction? Nice guy, friend of mine. He bought some property east, behind the pilot station back. There's a beautiful home back there. But there's a cemetery. We're not in the city of Terre Haute, but certainly Vigo County. He didn't know, and he ran across the cemetery there one day. And his property is probably 80, 100 acres out there. And Danny's a good guy. He's a wild character, but he's a great guy. If he's on YouTube listening to me, I love you, Danny. But anyway, he wasn't aware that cemetery was there, so he found it, and he totally brought it back to life. So no pun intended, but he really did. He manicured it, and of course, people would help him and work and mow, fixed it. And then right after that, people started saying, "Oh, I think my aunt Edith's buried in your cemetery." So he's very, very good about taking people back there. And there are other private little cemeteries like that around Vigo County that I know people own on their property that aren't so open about it, which I find kind of bothersome to me. But so I think if I had that, it would be like, "Oh gosh, yes, please come visit and do genealogy or visit your relatives, whatever you want to do." But I think it's our responsibility to take care of those cemeteries. So, any other questions about cemeteries? I thought it might be interesting. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
I have one. I wanted to find the records for Kennedy Cemetery, which is up on Rosemont pavement. In the Vigo County. How do you find records on the cemetery?
Cemetery's tough. Funeral homes, I can kind of guide you. Cemeteries, Kennedy Cemetery, and where was it? Is it?
Right past Denham Road,
Oh, I know where that's at. That's the trustee operates that cemetery, and I'll tell you who may have the records for that. Who? No. Well, maybe, but I'll tell you the family. Yes, all the Connors are buried in there, and they kind of had adopted that. I buried Dr. Connor in that cemetery actually. Yeah, but they kind of adopted that cemetery because their home is just right up the hill there. They're kind of compound, 3 or 4 homes. Yeah, actually Dr. Connor's family. That's right. See, I got there. So, yes, there are 2 or 3 little cemeteries right there. And there are little cemeteries all over the place. Some friends of mine growing up, friends of my parents, lived out by Riley off of 159, and his son and I were out in the woods messing around as you do. We ran across the cemetery right by the railroad tracks. And I'm sure no one knew that it was there. But like Danny Wolf, my parents' friends went back there and started mowing and cleaning. So, and I don't know that anyone ever knew that was there. But think about it. In those days, you had a farm you lived at. People didn't have transportation. They didn't hop in the car and go to Baszler's. My gosh, they went to town. It was a major event. And they would, take all day or 2 or 3 days. So if Grandma died, they buried Grandma in the field. And that's just the way it was. I don't need to tell you that. That's just the way it was. Now today, you might get in a little trouble for that if you did that. In city limits especially. So. Do what?
In the country too, the state of Indiana.
Yes. You could though. If you want to bury and you have the money and you own the property in the county, you can pull it off. If you bury Grandma in the backyard though, even with all the legal papers, it's forever deemed a cemetery. So if you go to sell that house, they don't have abstracts much anymore. But they have deeds and property, all those things. It's going to say Grandma Smith is buried there, and it's a cemetery in the backyard on Woodsmall Road, or whatever it is. So do what?
You have to go with the revolutionary guy. Not that bad. I was going to ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
I ran across a cemetery. This is in another state. That had to be relocated because the coal company was going to go through there. Have you know anything about the legal
It's huge.
procedures on relocating 50 people to another given
A little bit about that. When I worked for Service Corporation International, and I wasn't involved with it, but a peer of mine at the time, a market director in Nevada area, had to move a cemetery, and I think there were 70 graves in it. The law in Nevada was, and I think it's probably similar, is that you had to have 60%, you had to search who those people were, and you had to get 60% of people you could find to sign off on that. If you had 60%, you could move 100% of the cemetery. And they absorb, of course, total cost. They have to assure that the body is moved in 100% intact, and if they crack or mess a vault up or whatever, they have to replace the vault. So that's what I know about it. It was a big deal, and it was very, very expensive. I think it was about $2 million to move those 70 graves.
notification has to be printed and be printed.
Yes, exactly. And I think for so many days and so many times, we are this corporation, we want to move Grandview Cemetery to a new site and here. You're exactly right. It was amazing, and they could stop it.
Who brought that bill?
Who the company, whoever, if I'm Acme Coal Company and I'm buying that property, Acme Coal Company's paying the bill. The family has no out-of-pocket, none. Are you familiar with Brown Cemetery, south of town, down by us, just south of Paint Mill there? You know where that's at? Brown and Brown 2, I call it. Yeah. Well, of course, the coal mine and everybody was all around there, and my great-grandfather was buried in there. So, at the time, to kind of go back with the story, when that all started and the coal mine started going through there originally in the 30s, 40s, I don't know, I'm making that up, but about that time, they wanted to move that cemetery. And my grandfather, who's long passed away, who was a great guy, he and his brothers, he had 5 brothers, they said, "You're not going to do that." And they fought it and fought it and fought it, and it did not get done. So, down in the hole now. Yes, that's right. Yeah, Howard Greiners. That's correct. And then on down the road to the east, I call it Brown 2. That's exactly right. And that's the only cemetery that I'm aware of in Vigo County that will give you a free grave. If you call the trustee at Brown Cemetery and say, "I don't have any money, help me," they'll say, "Okay, here's a grave." Yes, it does. That's exactly. That's right. That's right. Don't tell my family that, but you're exactly right. I know a lot about cemeteries like that, water wet, who's wet and who's not, but we don't talk about that publicly. So. Well, that's not uncommon. That happens about every cemetery we've been in. So they put a pump in and pump water out. Sometimes, yeah. So, questions about that? Okay. I thought it'd be, oh yes, I'm sorry.
Is that a law? Somebody finds cemeteries that looked at for a long time. Is it a law? That those cemeteries have to be moved to another area or something?
No.
Because when I was young, I was in Greene County, and I know for a fact down the road myself in the country, those cemeteries, this guy had a guy with those that came in. Those that got cleaned up. That was it. The cemeteries that are taken care of is your township trustee.
That's correct.
Your township trustee is on top of that, it's with the term. They take care of it, but they have no right to trespass. People, I'm sorry, I know some of the people that sort of think you have the right to trespass, you do not. That's not the law of the state of Indiana. You can believe it all you want to. If they want to have you arrested, they can trespass. But it's really the trustee. And, whoever the trustee is, and how they want to look at it, and how they want to take care of it.
Yes, Janice.
The state of Indiana, the only you have to allow someone.
I know what you're going to say. All right. You have to, It's a Memorial Day once a year access. So let's say my friend Danny Wolf, who is not this way at all on YouTube recording, he's not this way at all. But if he wanted to be a poop about it and say, you're never coming on my property, even though he's not that way at all, you could call him tonight and he'd say, sure, let's go out and see Anita. But if not, he does have to let him on one time a year. That's the law. That is the law. But back to your question about, there is a state board of cemeteries, cemetery regulation. However, they're not really the cemetery police that drive around and monitor those things. So if you buy a big farm and you uncover 2 or 3 graves there, probably, I'm not condoning this, but probably nobody's going to know what happens to those graves. And that's what happens. 24 inches. Yep. Yeah. And I don't think that's uncommon. I think as time goes on, they will be uncovered and turned up after the same farmland is farmed and farmed and farmed. But everybody's right with what they're saying here. But there's no perfect world about it. If I buy a big farm tomorrow or clear out a clearing and I uncover a little cemetery, it's an ethical, moral question to me whether I want to say, do I really want to build my house here, or do I want to protect this ground? And that's a decision I would have to make. I've never been put in that position, but that's a decision that you would have to make and I would have to make. So, okay. It's about 7:20. We're going to talk about funeral homes now. My area. You all know more than I do. I hate this. Okay. Did you have a question, ma'am? No? Okay. All right. I thought it would be interesting. Now, if we wanted to be here like 9 hours, I could read through this. We're not going to. They were kidding me at work that I was going to stand there and go, well, page 1, number 1. We're not going to do that. But it was interesting to me some of the names of funeral homes that I had never heard of. But then I picked out some ones that I'm going to kind of trace a little bit. Graham Funeral Home, Seitz Funeral Home. Isaac Ball started in 1864, 3rd and Cherry, this says. Agar Funeral Home, Walter Funeral Home, and in Terre Haute, Katzenbach Funeral Home. Have you heard of that? Katzenbach, 1872. Oh, we probably ran across some paperwork somewhere. I hadn't. O'Donnell, Queenan, Queenan, Queenan and Mesick, Main and 8th Street. Don't know. Katzenbach pops up again. Confair Funeral Home. Katzenbachs are in here a lot. So, and then, of course, the Ryan Funeral Home. We'll talk about Ryan's a little bit, how that kind of happened. And it's interesting to go, the farther we go ahead, the further we go here, the name's thin. So it's the same repeats, and somebody survived in a funeral business and somebody has not. So, but this goes all the way up. Okay. I made a list of contemporary funeral homes that I think we'll all know about. Now, Ball Funeral Home we've talked about, and we know where Ball Funeral Home ended up, and hopefully they have records. Call David tomorrow, see, 232-1365. I'm a walking phone book. Okay, now talk about Ryan Funeral Home. Now, Ryan Funeral Home no longer is in business, but to talk about Ryan Funeral Home, and I don't know about originally, but the Ryan Funeral that many remember right now is on South 7th Street. The big white building's been for sale. And the minute the sign went up, I had probably 20 phone calls in a week. Gary, are you going to buy that? Are you going to buy it? Are you going to buy it? Well, obviously I did not, because it wouldn't look like that if I did. But the reason I didn't buy it is because it has a 20-year deed restriction on it. It can't be a funeral home for 20 years. Yeah, that's why it hasn't sold, because who really wants it, It's a neat old building, but if you go by there, it's just, unfortunately, getting worse and worse and worse. But well, what's wrong with it?
No, I mean, what did you say?
It has a deed restriction on it, so it cannot be a funeral home. And then that SCI, the company I used to work for, ironically, owns that building out of Houston, Texas. So they don't want someone like me to buy it, because they own other funeral homes here in town. Yeah, so that's why that's happened. That's a whole legal, political conversation, but so we'll keep it history-based. But anyway, but that was Ryan Funeral Home. And before that, the old Bedino Funeral Home at 6th and Poplar, that was Ryan. That was the original Ryan Funeral Home. Yes, it was a great old building under all that stuff. Yes, and had horse stables in the back. But for those of you who remember the Bedino building with all the stone and the weird angles and all that kind of stuff, under all of that was a beautiful, big old mansion. Beautiful home. I'd seen pictures of it. So there were Ryan brothers, and they kind of got in a fight and kind of split and all this stuff. And so one of them moved over to South 7th Street. So that's how that all happened. There was Frank Ryan and P.J. Ryan. Okay. I'm telling the highlights. And there were several generations of P.J. Ryan, Patrick J. They even spelled the name differently. They went from R-Y-N to R-Y-H-A-N, R-Y-H-A-N to R, as it is today. So that's interesting. Ryan Funeral Home records. I know the girls probably know where they are. Do you know where they are? Okay, Roselawn would have those. Yeah, just take notes. Take notes, Janice. Okay, because SCI owns Roselawn, Maddox Funeral Home, Thomas Funeral Home, and they owned Ryan. They still own the property. So any of those records would be at Roselawn for Ryan. See, I thought that was interesting. Any questions about that, to the best of my knowledge? Yes, sir. Family-owned funeral homes are mine, Greiner, the bank, and First Financial Bank, and I own my funeral home. And most funerals in town have a bank involved, I'm pretty sure. DeBon on Spring Hill Road is owned by the DeBon family. David Callahan on South 605 South 25th Street owns his funeral home, and the DeBons own the former Callahan Funeral Home at 25th and Wabash, which is now DeBon East, I believe they call it, DeBon Wabash Chapel. And then that's it, local. Maddox, Ryan, and Thomas are all owned by SCI out of Houston, Texas. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Just to let anybody know that if you want records out of DeBon's funeral home, if you will go by Springfield and give them the dates of the person and name, and they will go to the Callahan, the books are actually at the Callahan, and they'll go and look your information up for you.
And I can't speak for all funeral homes, and we'll do our best because I find it interesting, and I know Kurt III finds that interesting, so he would help as well. Absolutely. Did you hear that, Kurt, on the recording? I said that. So. Okay. Talk about the Callahans. It was kind of interesting. I thought I knew everything about Callahan Funeral Home, and I didn't. Callahan originally started on North 13th Street, just north of Wabash, and it was called Callahan Hunter Funeral Home. Had a partner, Thomas P. Callahan, started it, and then of course anybody know? We all know they were at 25th and Wabash, but where on Wabash were they before? You get a keychain, sir. 13th and a half. And if the building is still there, and there's a print shop downstairs, maybe now. A friend of mine, Andy Fox, owns that building, and he has a really, really neat apartment, that whole building upstairs. And it says Callahan. That building has an angle on it. Yeah, if you look up, it says Callahan etched right in it. Keychain. Congratulations. So I think that was kind of interesting. Yeah, and then of course Callahan's had several sons. And then they built the building in the late 50s, about 58, 60, and 25th and Wabash. And then the family slowly passed away and transitioned, and that's finally DeBon's bought that building, I think in 2000 or 2001. And they've dropped the Callahan name, and now it's DeBon. So then David Callahan certainly is a Callahan. His father was John Callahan, and he and his uncle Joe kind of had a parting of the ways at some point. I'm being really nice here. They had a big fight. Anyway, they had a parting of the ways, and David went down the street and bought, at the time, Ball Porter Funeral Home, and so it became Callahan and Hughes because of Dick Hughes had bought that out. So that's kind of how that works. David and I went to kindergarten together and graduated high school together. So I've known David a long time. So that's the history of Callahan Funeral Home. Callahan Funeral Home has a long history. They were huge in their day. They did a lot of numbers, and that's how a funeral home bases is success or whatever, is how many calls a year you do. So that's how Callahan Funeral Home was, and David Callahan is the only Callahan in the funeral business, to my knowledge, in Terre Haute now. So Hickman Funeral Home, remember Hickman on Wabash Avenue? Okay, Charlie Hickman was a neighbor of my grandparents. Hickman Funeral Home was in business a long time. I think it finally closed, and you may know records from there. Yes, ma'am.
They're here in Northline, and also Vigo County.
Yeah, Hickman. Well, yes. Yeah. 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 It's Tierman, T-E-A-R-M-A-N. Yeah, right. Because Martin Tierman, there was Martin Tierman Funeral Home, which was on, get my story straight, South 6th Street at 6th and Swan, or that big, beautiful building. There's a title company there now. That was Martin Tierman Funeral Home. And they were in business a long time, until the late 50s, actually. And what's interesting, I look back and I collect old advertising things from funeral homes just because I'm in the business. But, you know, they had these fans everywhere, and some people still use these in churches. They, you know, especially people from the African-American culture, they really like these. So I buy them. If they want them, here you go. I'll buy them for them. But anyway, what's interesting, I look back at the funeral homes through the years that I've noticed, and who spent money advertising and who didn't. And the reason you can tell is because there's a whole bunch of Martin Tierman stuff. Martin Tierman must have been crazy about advertising and stuff. They had clocks and thermometers and radios, and I've seen everything. But ironically, who didn't advertise, I'd probably found anything, was Cross Funeral Home, the building I own.